So thank you so much for letting me steal a little bit of time in today's forum with a policy conversation. Robert, I think, I really appreciate your comment there. And language matters, and stories matters, and data matters. So how do we make sure that the plans and strategies and policies guiding the investment, the programs, the work that's underway is inclusive, reflects the good work that's happening on the ground, is reported in a way that we can keep the progress up, is really part of this review. I would like to thank Brenton for his welcome and just a reflection and an acknowledgement of country, not just for the First Nations people in the country here, but across all reef land and sea country. I think I'd really like to acknowledge 65,000 years of stewardship and custodianship over land and sea, and that really special connection between the human beings, the land, the country, and the sea. Chanel covered this a little bit, so just if we take that really super step back in policy world, the Great Barrier Reef is a World Heritage listed property. So what that means is UNESCO has acknowledged that it has outstanding universal values, and based on those values, has listed this property as a World Heritage property. Australia then has a commitment and obligations to protect those outstanding universal values. And it does so through the Reef 2050 Long-Term Sustainability Plan. So that's the big overarching document that sits at the top that really talks about what those values are, what the threats to those values are, and then lists a gazillion different strategies, plans to protect the property against those threats. So in that big overarching piece, then we have that poor water quality story that then leads us to the Water Quality Improvement Plan, which is the document that is currently under review. So the Water Quality Improvement Plan has been around for many years. This will be its 5th iteration, so it's really an evolving space. But I think one of the really nice, I think if we think back to the previous version of the plan, it has started to move to this more interconnectivity in between the systems, the land, the reef, also identifying the different values in the landscape, the different land uses, including the inclusion of the urban environment in the last plan. So it's that move to a more holistic and inclusive story that happened in 2017 when the plan was released. Chanel also covered that one, so this is just a reminder that like all government plans and strategies, we do logic frames and we love doing diagrams, right? But I guess this diagram really starts from that good water quality, protects the reef. It then sets some very high level objectives. And I think part of the review process is really looking at, are we heading in the right direction, or is this an opportunity to reset the story that we're telling ourselves? The objectives there, you can see it covers seagrass and coral condition. It talks about biodiversity, I think terrestrial biodiversity, but it could be reef biodiversity as well. For our communities, the objective is to maintain viable communities. Not quite sure what that means, but hopefully we can aspire for more. It includes governance as an objective. What the logic frame then does is set those water quality targets. A reminder that the water quality targets are they're ecologically relevant targets. So unlike other types of targets that government sets, like climate change targets, where it's setting an ambition, this is setting what would seagrass and coral need to be healthy from those, from dissolved inorganic nitrogen, sediment, particulate nitrogen and phosphorus, and pesticides. It then sets land management targets. So how are we going to work together to achieve those water quality targets? So it sets a target for agriculture where 90% of agricultural land will be managed under best practice. It sets a vaguish urban target. Remembering last time, we firstly introduced that urban space. It sets riparian zone and wetland extent targets and that ground cover condition, target, which is very linked to condition. If it rains, we meet. If it doesn't rain, it's harder to meet. And then at the bottom, the human dimension targets. So how do humans contribute? Chanil covered that then the paddock to reef monitoring and reporting program reports to those targets. So essentially, this sets the reporting framework for how we produce those report cards. So I guess if we're reviewing this, it is an opportunity to have a think about what's the story that we're telling and how do we want to monitor and report against that story. So we've been on this journey for a while, and I think it is very fair to say that there's many implementation challenges, and I will really bring us back to that language matters and narrative matters. My head always starts with the challenges at the scale. We have a glossy 20-page, 30-page document that is capturing from the tip of the Cape to the bottom of the Barnett Mary. And as we all know, there are regional differences between all those areas, from soil to climate conditions to communities. How do we plan at that scale? Size of Italy, I kind of wonder whether Italy has a 20-page glossy to tackle one problem. I think the local capacity, if we reflect on the need of, this is long-term change, this is a long-term journey. So do we have the local capacity that is there to enable those changes? And then at the right level in the region to cater for the regional differences. Investment, not only the amount of investment, but the way government rolls out programs and funding opportunities, I have heard, is a huge implementation challenge to enabling that long-term legacy outcomes, as well as ensuring that that capacity and capability is available. And time, I think Rob covered that. The changes we make today are long-term. They're not going to show up in the very next report card because change takes time. But we live in a world where people want results now. How do we enable, the successes over time? And I think really reflecting on already the conversation today is that how do we actually celebrate the really good stuff that is happening and building on that? In terms of reviewing the plan, I think it's a really good opportunity today, and a lot of the table exercises will be talking about these sorts of challenges and barriers, and we're here today to really listen and try to understand what does it feel like on the ground to try and implement this thing and turn that into opportunities for the review. If we are going to review this plan, can we together create a better story, create a better plan? And in that is really the scope of our review. I talk a lot about a more holistic and inclusive narrative. I think the current plan through history has been largely focused on agriculture. Last time we introduced the urban sector, but can we move on that inclusion journey and make sure that communities are included in how we manage catchments for a healthy reef? We want to build on the knowledge and successes. So the combined experience in this room is amazing. We don't want to put things that work in the bin, right? We want to keep moving forward. We want to make sure that we're leveraging and learning on those successes. Setting priority or pointy actions. The current plan has 86 different line items of actions or deliverables, which then gets each agency, the Queensland and the federal government, then implements it differently, and it dilutes investment, if you may. Can we have a really good look at what sorts of actions we want and set pointier actions? And can we look at the framework? So there's that REEF 2050 plan, and then there's a water quality improvement plan, then there's a wetland strategy, and then there's the monitoring and reporting, and then there's a gazillion different layers to these plans. Can we somehow simplify that framework, making the story easier to understand and follow? So in terms of scope of the review, we're on the land side. But I think if we can reshape the plan to being more inclusive and holistic, that would be fantastic. So I keep saying the word holistic. I think holistic is really that integration between communities, the humans, the landscapes, and the water. We think, can we represent that logic frame differently? Can we find opportunity in how we represent the logic? And can we start the conversation from a values perspective? So can we acknowledge that we humans have different values that drive us, our behavior, our actions, and our drivers? Can the government set clear outcomes and objectives and really focus on what those critical enablers are to achieving those objectives and outcomes? So if we start from the outset, identifying that we have cultural, social, economic, and environmental values that all we make decisions based on. This is where I say this is not government policy. So in terms of a policy process, I'm at the very beginning of the policy journey. This is just a way to have the conversations today and to hear what are the challenges and opportunities from this region, so that we can reflect that in the next version of the plan. So we're really, really, really early in that journey. But what happens if we have community ownership, resilient landscapes, and healthy water? Can we get better outcomes in the reef? And what happens if, for community ownership, what happens if traditional owners are empowered to care for country and there is employment, including in nature-based solutions and regional economies? What if our programs are more inclusive and we have more cross-participation across community groups? What happens if benefits are shared and if our businesses are viable or sustainable or thriving in the regions? So it's trying to bring in that community element to the forefront of the plan as opposed to the very bottom of a logic frame, and the humans come along at the end. In terms of resilient landscape, we talk about ecosystem function. So soil health is an ecosystem function that we know we need to achieve water quality targets. Biodiversity, that biodiversity objective, what does biodiversity mean in terms of soil health or in terms of waterway health? Catchment management, how are we managing and planning for landscape or catchment at the right scale? Care for country or healing country, how are traditional owners, custodians empowered to heal country? And sustainable land use, how are agricultural sustainability frameworks contributing to our water quality objectives? And in terms of the healthy water, yes, we do have to get to those water quality targets. They're really, really important. But are we ever going to get there without a clear role for communities and landscapes? So in terms of water quality, linking with that water quantity hydrology story. Water is life from a traditional custodian perspective. Can we protect traditional custodian values for water? So this is a different way of representing that program logic that we currently have in the plan. It's also a different way of enabling conversations. And I think that pesticide question is exactly the conversations that we're trying to have. Where do we need to find policy ambition or policy consistency and integration for the next plan? Because it's exactly that. If you move one lever in a policy world and ban one pesticide, but it results in worse water quality outcomes, the government may achieve one objective, but not another. So what this does is enable us in government to have policy conversation across different departments, across different policy areas, to try and make sure that other policy makers are thinking about water quality in a broader context. So hopefully that makes sense. Come and see me if it doesn't. Policy is super dry. It's really hard to present to a room full of people. And critical enablers. We're never going to get there unless we have consistent policy and legislation, unless we have the partnerships and the trust, unless we have capacity building, the science and the technology. What role can the markets that are evolving play in this space? So this is a very, very quick overview of the review process so far. We are at the very beginning of the policy journey. I think I cannot understate that. Normally what government does is produce a draft document, give you 20 business days to give us some feedback. We then produce a final document, and then we say, some things couldn't be addressed. We're trying to do things really differently. It's really scary because it's a really long journey, and I don't necessarily have answers to every question today. But what questions like the pesticide question does for me is make sure that I put on my list, I need to talk to the pesticide policy unit to make sure that we're not pulling the wrong lever, or there's other options for when we do pull that lever. There will be a public version, public consultation version of the document early next year. And what we're doing is going to these forums, listening to as many people as we can so that your contribution makes it into that draft plan.